At my retirement party, my daughter-in-law made fun of everyone. "Bitter old woman, you have always been jealous because my parents have money." My son sat in silence. I did not respond. I just smiled, and I prepared myself to reveal a secret that would leave the entire room frozen. "I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this, like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge. I want to know how far it has gone." That retirement party was supposed to be my moment. After 37 years working as an accountant at Guzman and Associates, they had organized this beautiful gathering for me at the local country club. White tablecloths, fresh flowers, even a cake with my name written in elegant letters. I should have been happy. Instead, I stood motionless in the middle of the room, watching my son Daniel, while his wife Fernanda called me a bitter old woman. "You're just bitter because my parents have money," Fernanda said. Her voice cut through the room like a slap. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed at me with accusation. With her designer dress shining under the crystal chandeliers, she added, "You have always been jealous of our lifestyle." The room was silent. My former co-workers, my neighbors, even the catering staff stopped what they were doing to watch. I felt the heat rising up my neck, that familiar burn of humiliation. Fernanda added, looking at Daniel with a casual, almost bored tone, "You're useless now. Better accept that and stop trying to get into our lives." Useless now. Those words echoed in my head as I looked at him. This 35-year-old man I raised alone after his father died when he was barely 8. The boy I worked double shifts for. The teenager I sent to a private school, even though that meant eating beans and rice for weeks. Fernanda kept talking, her voice getting more cheerful with each word. "The truth, Laura, is, it's shameful how you try to compete with us. We know you're struggling for money. Daniel told me about your apartment, your old car. It's sad, really." She turned to the guests, acting as if she were on a stage. "She insists on giving us money advice when she can barely pay her bills. It's pathetic." A murmur went through the room. I saw the pity in people's eyes, how they looked away when I tried to meet their gaze. Mrs. Perez, my neighbor, even nodded her head sadly, as if I were a charity case. It was then that something inside me broke. Not an explosive burst of screams and anger, but a silent one that feels like a door closing forever. I took a deep breath and smiled, not with the false smile I had been wearing all night, but with an authentic one that comes when you finally stop pretending. "Fernanda, honey," I said. My voice resonated clearly in the silent room. "Since you mentioned money, I think it's time we talked about something." She rolled her eyes with exaggeration. "Oh, here we go. Another lecture on saving $2. I interrupted her without stopping my smile. The color faded from her face so quickly I thought she was going to pass out. In fact, she stumbled a little, grabbing Daniel's arm so she wouldn't fall. "What are you talking about?" he asked, but his confidence was gone. I turned to address the crowd just as Fernanda had been doing. You see, a few years ago, Fernanda's parents needed a fairly large loan, $2 million to be exact. They were having financial problems. Fernanda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "No, you can't." "I can, and I am," I replied calmly. "The loan was made 3 years ago under very reasonable conditions. 5% interest to be paid in 7 years. Of course, so far they have only covered about 6 months. People were watching, but not with pity anymore. They looked from Fernanda to me with fascination, as if they were watching a tennis match. "That is impossible," she murmured, but her voice broke. I put my hand in my pocket and took out my cell phone. With a few taps, I opened my banking app and showed the screen to the crowd. "Does anyone want to see the loan documentation? Everything is completely legal." Daniel approached, squinting at the screen. His face turned pale when he saw the figures. "Mom, what is this? How? $2,437,612.18, I said in a clear voice. "That is what your wife's parents owe me right now, including the unpaid interest." Fernanda made a strange sound and had to grab the back of a chair to keep from falling. "This must be a mistake. You're an accountant. You live in that little apartment. You drive a 15-year-old Honda." "Yes, I drive a 15-year-old Honda," I said. "And yes, I live in a small apartment. But you know what they say about making assumptions, dear." The room was in complete silence, except for the soft jazz that kept playing from the speakers, creating an almost surreal backdrop for the scene. "You see," I continued, my voice getting stronger with every word, "your parents came to me 3 years ago, desperate. Their business was going bankrupt, and they needed capital immediately. They had heard through acquaintances that I could help them." Fernanda shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, no, no. My parents have money. They have always had it. They paid for our wedding. They bought the house." "With my money," I answered without hesitation. "Every dollar your parents have spent in the last 3 years came from that loan." Daniel slumped into the nearest chair, pale and confused. But you always said you didn't have much. You said you were barely surviving on your salary." "I said I lived simply," I corrected. "I never said I was poor." Fernanda's breathing became rapid and shallow. She kept looking around as if searching for an escape. "This is crazy. You're lying. You're making this up because you're a bitter, jealous woman. Do you want me to call your parents right now?" I asked, pulling up their number on my phone. "I'm sure they would be happy to confirm the details." "No!" Fernanda shouted, almost hysterical, and then immediately lowered her voice when she realized how loud she had been. "No, don't do that." "Why not, honey? If I'm lying, I'd be happy to clear up the truth." Fernanda's face crumbled. For a moment, she looked like a lost little girl instead of the sophisticated woman who had torn me apart just minutes before. "Please," she whispered, "please don't do this." But I was done pleasing those who never gave me the same respect. I was done being treated like a burden by the family I had given everything for. I looked around at all the faces watching me now, with respect and curiosity. Then I looked at my son, still slumped in his seat, trying to process what he had just heard. "Enjoy the rest of the party," I said, putting my phone in my purse. "I think I'm going to go home now." As I walked toward the door, I heard Fernanda's voice behind me, sharp and desperate. "Laura, wait. We have to talk. We have to—" But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I kept walking, and with every step, I felt lighter than I had in years. The valet brought my 15-year-old Honda around, and as I drove away from the country club, I couldn't help but smile. Tomorrow, I thought, was going to be a very interesting day. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I sat in my small living room with a cup of tea surrounded by photo albums and financial papers I hadn't touched in years. The silence felt different, not like loneliness, but like calm. For the first time in decades, I wasn't worried about disappointing someone. The photos told a story I had almost erased from my memory. There I was at 28, holding little Daniel in the hospital, my face exhausted but lit up. My husband Robert had died just 2 months earlier in a construction accident, leaving me with a mortgage, a newborn, and exactly $590 in the bank. I ran my finger over the photo, remembering that terrified young woman who didn't know what she was capable of. The insurance money from Robert's death was modest, barely enough to cover the funeral and a few months of the mortgage. Everyone told me to sell the house to move in with my mother to accept any help I could get. But something inside me refused. That was Daniel's house. It was the place where his father had painted the bedroom walls blue and built shelves for the books we never got to read together. So I kept the house and got a job. Not just any job, but one at Guzman & Associates, a small accounting firm that needed someone willing to work odd hours for low pay. I started as a receptionist, but I watched everything and learned everything. Numbers always made more sense to me than people. In 2 years, I was handling the accounts of 3 of their biggest clients. In 5, I was practically running the entire financial side of the business while Hector Guzman played golf and had lunch with clients. He paid me just enough to keep the lights on and food on the table, but I was building something else on the side. It started small. I noticed errors in how clients organized their businesses. Tax benefits, they were missing investments, they were ignoring. I started giving discreet suggestions that saved them thousands of dollars, and word got around. Soon I was giving financial advice on nights and weekends to small business owners who couldn't afford the big firms, but needed someone who understood money. I charged affordable fees and delivered top-notch results. My reputation grew. By the time Daniel was in middle school, I was managing investment portfolios for a dozen local businesses. I had formed my own consulting firm, kept it low profile, and channeled the profits into carefully selected stocks and real estate. I lived modestly, drove used cars, and let everyone assume I was barely getting by on my accountant's salary. The truth was, I was building an empire, a silent, invisible empire that nobody suspected. I learned early on that people treat you differently when they think you have money. They ask for things they expect, things they feel entitled to a piece of your success. I watched how the wealthy clients at Guzman and Associates dealt with the constant pressure from their families, the endless requests for loans and favors the way their children grew up expecting everything to be handed to them. I didn't want that for Daniel. I wanted him to have a normal childhood, to develop his own sense of work and values. That's why I hid my growing fortune behind a facade of middle-class struggle. I shopped at discount stores, clipped coupons, and complained about prices just like my neighbors. But I also made sure Daniel never lacked anything important. The private school tuition magically appeared every semester. The college funds materialized when needed, and there was always money for what really mattered. I just made it look like I was stretching every dollar, sacrificing for his sake. Looking back, I realized the flaws in my plan. I focused so much on not spoiling Daniel that maybe I went too far. He grew up believing we were just scraping by, that every opportunity he had was the result of my struggle and sacrifice. In part, it was true, but he never understood the scale of what I had built, the security I had created for both of us. When Daniel graduated from college with a business degree, I discreetly used my contacts to help him get his first job. When he wanted to open his own consulting firm, I arranged for several of my clients to be his first customers. When he decided to expand, I made sure the bank approved his credit application. He thought he achieved it all on his own merit, and in many ways he had. I had raised him to be smart and hardworking, but I was also paving his way in ways he never imagined. Then came Fernanda. I remember the first time Daniel brought her over for dinner. She was beautiful in that polished, expensive way that spoke of exclusive club memberships and European vacations. Her clothes were designer, her jewelry was real, her confidence was unshakable. She observed my modest apartment with barely concealed disdain, making little comments about the quaint decor and the cozy space. During dinner, she told us in great detail about her parents' recent trips to Tuscany, their new yacht, their plans to buy a vineyard. She spoke about money so naturally it was clear she had never had to worry about it in her life. When she mentioned her father owned several car dealerships in 3 states, I understood where the wealth came from. What I didn't understand was why she seemed so determined to make me feel small. Daniel tells me you work as an accountant. That must be tough making ends meet on that kind of salary. I smiled politely and replied that it was an honest job. I didn't mention that I had just closed a consulting deal that would net me more in 6 months than most people earn in 2 years. After they left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been judged and found wanting. Fernanda had looked at my small apartment, my simple way of life, and dismissed me as unimportant. I told myself it didn't matter, that her opinion held no weight. But as her relationship with Daniel progressed, I began to notice changes in him. He started making comments about my situation, asking if I needed help with bills, suggesting that maybe I should move to a smaller place to save money. His tone sounded sincere, but it hurt. My own son was starting to see me through Fernanda's eyes. The wedding was a spectacle that cost more than most people's houses. Fernanda's parents spared no expense. They flew in flowers from Holland and hired a string quartet that had played for European royalty. I wore a simple dress from a department store and sat in the 3rd row watching my son marry into a world that made my life seem insignificant by comparison. After the wedding, the distance widened. Daniel and Fernanda moved into a house that her parents had helped them buy. They furnished it with antiques and art that cost more than I had spent on furniture in my entire life. When I visited, I felt like a tourist in a museum, afraid to touch anything. Fernanda was always polite, but it was the kind of politeness you show a service provider or a distant acquaintance. She would ask about my job with feigned interest. She would comment that my little car was cute. She would offer to take me shopping for better clothes. Every encounter left me feeling smaller, less important. And Daniel, perhaps without realizing it, began to adopt her way of seeing things. He stopped asking for my advice on his business decisions. He stopped calling as often. When we did talk, the conversation felt forced, like he was checking in on an elderly relative out of obligation, not talking to his mother. It was then that Fernanda's parents contacted me. It was 3 years ago on a Tuesday night when my phone rang with an unknown number. On the other end was Margaret Morales, Fernanda's mother, her voice tight with desperation. "Laura, I hope you don't mind me calling," she said. "But we're in trouble and someone mentioned you might be able to help." The story came out in halting pieces: bad investments, market downturns, cash flow problems that had spiraled out of control. The car dealerships were bleeding money, creditors were circling, and bankruptcy was looming. They needed capital immediately, and traditional banks had already turned them down. "We heard from acquaintances that you might have some resources," Margaret said carefully. "Connections, perhaps, or knowledge of private lenders." I almost laughed. This was the woman who had looked down on me for years now, calling the poor accountant for help. But something in her tone stopped me. A genuine fear. The terror of losing everything they had built. Everything that defined their family's identity. I could have said no. I probably should have. But I thought of Daniel. How devastated he would be if his wife's family lost everything. I thought of Fernanda with all her flaws, and how this would shatter the world she grew up in. And maybe deep down I thought this could be a bridge, a way to finally be seen as someone valuable, worthy of respect. "How much do you need?" I asked. The figure was staggering. $2 million, more money than most people see in a lifetime. But I had it tucked away in investment accounts that had been growing steadily for decades. We met the next day at a lawyer's office downtown. Margaret and Richard Morales sat across from me, their faces pale with stress and shame. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in private loans, explained the terms. 5% interest paid monthly over 7 years, with personal guarantees from Richard and Margaret, and an obligation to inform immediate family members about the loan structure, though in the end, that disclosure never happened. The Morales family made it clear they wanted to keep everything private to maintain their dignity and their daughter's respect. I understood. Pride is a powerful force, and they had already swallowed a lot of it by asking me for help. So we structured it as a private investment in their business, with documents that would only become relevant if they defaulted. To everyone else, including Fernanda and Daniel, it would seem as though the Morales family had found an angel investor, not that they were borrowing money from the woman their daughter treated like a charity case. For the first few months, everything went well. The payments arrived on time, the business stabilized, and the Morales family maintained their lifestyle. Fernanda never knew how close they had come to losing it all, or who had saved them. But then the payments started coming late. Then they stopped coming at all. Now, sitting in my living room, with the loan documents spread across the coffee table, I understood what I should have seen from the beginning. The Morales family wasn't just borrowing money. They were buying time, keeping up appearances, hoping something would change. And when nothing did, they simply decided to ignore their obligations. After all, what could a poor accountant do? They were about to find out. The morning after my retirement party, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of hurt and confusion that had clouded my judgment was gone, replaced by something sharper, more focused. I made my coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and started making calls. The first was to my lawyer, Patricia Ramirez. I had worked with her for years to structure my investments and consulting contracts, but we had never been close. That was about to change. "Patricia, it's Laura Mendoza. I need to schedule a meeting as soon as possible. It's about the Morales loan and some other matters that have come up." Her voice sharpened with interest. "Has there been any development with the payment situation?" "You could say that. Can you see me this afternoon?" "I'll make time." The second call was to Mark Chavez, my financial advisor. Mark had been managing my investment portfolio for 15 years and was one of the few people who truly understood the scale of my wealth. He was also incredibly discreet, which had always worked in my favor. "Mark, I need you to do a full analysis of all accounts linked to Daniel Mendoza. Loans where he's listed as a guarantor, lines of credit, investments, everything. I want a complete picture of his finances." There was a pause on the other end. "Laura, is everything okay? You sound different." "Everything is about to change." "How long will it take you to get that information?" "Give me 24 hours." The third call was the hardest. I dialed my son's number. I knew that after what happened last night, our relationship had changed forever. He answered on the fourth ring, his tone cautious. "Mom, is that you? How are you feeling today?" "I feel pretty good. In fact, better than I have in a long time." I kept my voice pleasant but firm. "I was hoping you and Fernanda could come by tonight. There are things we need to discuss." "About last night, Mom, Fernanda is very upset. She barely slept." "Maybe we should wait a few days for things to cool down." "No, Daniel. Tonight at 7. It can't wait." I hung up before he could argue. The meeting with Patricia that afternoon revealed more than I imagined. She spread the Morales loan documents on the table, along with several files I hadn't seen before. "Laura, there's something you should know about the Morales situation. They've been looking for refinancing options for the last 6 months. They've contacted 3 private lenders trying to consolidate their debts." I felt my stomach clench. "What kind of debts?" "Beyond your loan, they owe approximately $6.8 million to various creditors. Credit cards payments to suppliers, defaulted equipment leases. They've been using your money to make minimum payments on everything else while letting your loan slide." The betrayal hurt, but it wasn't the worst of it. Patricia pulled out another document, this one with the seal of the family court. They also filed a preliminary inquiry 6 months ago about challenging estate plans. Specifically, they wanted to understand the process for disputing wills when there are doubts about mental capacity. The room seemed to spin around me. Whose will were they talking about? They didn't specify, but given the timing and the context, I think we can guess. I stared at the document, feeling the pieces of a puzzle start to fit together. They think I'm losing my mental faculties. All signs point to them preparing to argue that yes. The inquiry specifically mentioned cases where older adults make financial decisions that don't match their history, like if a mediocre accountant suddenly had $2 million to lend someone. Exactly. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the information. The Morales family hadn't just defaulted on their debt. They were planning to argue I was never capable of granting the loan in the first place. If they could establish I was mentally incapacitated at the time, they could void the entire agreement. "Patricia, I need you to do something for me. I want a full psychiatric evaluation done by the most respected neuropsychologist in the state. Memory exams, cognitive tests, everything. And I want it on record that I requested this study myself, demonstrating clear judgment." She nodded as she took notes. "That's smart. It establishes a baseline of your competence and shows you're taking preventative measures. There's more. I want you to prepare a new will. A very specific one." I spent the next hour detailing exactly what I wanted. Patricia's eyebrows arched higher with each instruction, but she wrote it all down without protest. That evening, Daniel and Fernanda arrived at my apartment at exactly 7. Fernanda looked like she had been crying. Her impeccable makeup was slightly smudged. Daniel looked nervous, fiddling with his car keys. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to my small living room. "Would you like something to drink?" "Mom, we need to talk about last night," Daniel began immediately. "Fernanda's parents are very upset. They say you're confused about some money issue, but they don't want to embarrass you." I stopped him. My voice cut like a knife. "Stop. Just stop talking for a moment and listen." I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I had prepared. "Here are copies of all the loan documents between your wife's parents and me. Every page is signed, notarized, and legally binding." I handed the folder to Daniel, watching his face as he flipped through the pages. His expression shifted from skepticism to confusion, and then to dawning comprehension. This is real," he said softly. "Very real. $2 million loaned 3 years ago. They stopped paying completely 8 months ago. The current amount owed, including interest and penalties, is $2,612,418. Fernanda finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "How do you have that much money?" "I earned it. Over 30 years of careful investing and business consulting. While you thought I was a miserable old woman barely surviving, I was building a financial portfolio that makes your parents' car dealerships look like a lemonade stand. Daniel set the folder on the table, his hands trembling. But you never said. You always acted like money was tight. You live in this small apartment. You drive that old car. Because I choose to. Because I learned a long time ago that when people know you have money, they look at you like a resource, not a person. I looked directly at Fernanda. Your parents came to me because they were on the verge of bankruptcy. They begged me to help them. They swore they would be punctual with payments. They pleaded for it to be kept a secret to protect their dignity. I agreed because I thought it would help my son's marriage. Fernanda's face had gone completely pale. They told me they found an investor, a businessman who believed in the company. I am that businessman, Fernanda. I was the one who saved your parents from losing everything. I made it possible for them to maintain their lifestyle, to keep funding your expensive tastes, to hold their place in your social circle. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he felt overwhelmed. I don't understand. Gah. If you have all this money, why did you let us think otherwise? Why did you let me worry about your retirement, about your future security? The crack in his voice almost made me hesitate, but I pushed on. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I have. I wanted to know that you valued our relationship, not just my ability to solve your problems with money. And now? Fernanda asked, her voice hollow. I pulled out my phone and showed them a recording app. Now I know exactly what you think of me. Last night, in front of 50 people, you called me bitter, pathetic, useless. You made it clear that you see me as a burden, a shame. I played a clip from the audio of the night before, their own voices filling the small living room with cruel words. Fernanda flinched, hearing herself call me a bitter old hag. I recorded everything, I said simply. The whole conversation is documented. Daniel leaned forward, his face desperate. Mom, we were upset. We said things we didn't mean. No, Daniel, Fernanda said. You said exactly what you meant to say. You said what you've been thinking for years, what Fernanda has been repeating to you about me. That I'm worthless, that I have nothing to contribute, that my presence in your lives is an annoyance. I got up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. What you don't know is that I've been supporting your lifestyle for years. That consulting firm you started, 3 of your first 5 clients were companies I recommended to you. The bank loan for your expansion, I silently guaranteed it through a subsidiary company. The silence behind me was deafening. That house you live in, I helped structure the financing to save you hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes and interest. Your retirement accounts, your investment portfolio, even Fernanda's jewelry collection. It was all made possible by my advice, my contacts, and my direct financial support that you never knew about. I turned to face them. Daniel looked shattered while Fernanda seemed to be in shock. But the really interesting part is this, I continued, my voice growing colder. Today, I discovered that not only have your parents been ignoring their debt to me, but they've been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent to void the loan entirely. Fernanda's mouth opened and closed without a sound. They filed inquiries with the probate court to challenge wills and estate plans. They've been setting the stage to argue that I was mentally unfit when I made the loan and that it was impossible for me to have that kind of money to lend. Daniel looked at me in horror. They wouldn't. They couldn't. Oh, they could. And they planned to do it with your help. What do you mean? I pulled the final document from my folder. This is a statement prepared by a private investigator I hired. It details conversations you've had with Fernanda's parents over the last 6 months about my supposed mental decline and your concerns about my erratic behavior with money. Daniel's face went white. That's not... I never said you were incompetent. I was just worried about you, about some of the decisions you were making. What decisions, Daniel, like living in this small apartment when you could afford something better, like driving that old car, like not taking vacations or enjoying your retirement? It seemed like you were hoarding money irrationally, or maybe you didn't understand your own financial situation. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. So when Fernanda's parents needed character witnesses to back up their claim that I wasn't mentally competent to make large financial decisions, they were counting on your concerned observations as proof. "I didn't know," Fernanda whispered. "I didn't know they were planning something like that." "But you did know about the loan." "Not at first. They told me last month when you stopped answering their calls about the payments. They said you were confused, that you thought they owed you money, but that it was all a misunderstanding." I laughed a humorless sound. "A $2 million misunderstanding. They said you were getting older, that maybe you were confusing your client's money with your own. They were looking for a way to handle it gently without embarrassing you or getting you into trouble." "How considerate." Daniel shot up from his seat and began pacing the room. "This is insane. This is all completely insane. It turns out my mother is a millionaire, my in-laws are con artists, and my wife's family has been planning to legally destroy you." "That's a pretty accurate summary." He turned to me with a desperate expression. "What happens now?" I looked at him, remembering how he had allowed his wife to destroy me while he sat by. Then I fixed my gaze on Fernanda, as beautiful as she was arrogant, completely unprepared for the world that was about to collapse on her. "Now," I said softly, "you are both going to learn what it really costs to treat someone as disposable." The next morning, I began to dismantle the invisible system that had supported my son's life with the methodical precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. Each cut was clean, calculated, and irreversible. My first stop was at First National Bank, where I had maintained business relationships for over 20 years. James Montero, a senior vice president, greeted me with the warmth reserved for clients whose portfolios command respect. "Laura, what a pleasure to see you." "How was your retirement party? I heard it was quite an event." "It was revealing James. In fact, that's why I'm here. I need to make some changes to several accounts and lines of credit." We sat in his office surrounded by mahogany furniture and photos of James with various local figures. I took out a folder with loan documents and guarantee contracts that Daniel never knew existed. "I need to withdraw as guarantor for the Mendoza Consulting credit line," I said, sliding the papers across his desk. James frowned as he reviewed them. "This is a considerable line, Laura. $1.2 million. Your guarantee was what made this loan possible. Without it, the credit will have to be restructured based solely on the company's current assets and cash flow, which may not secure the same terms or amount. That is a problem for Mr. Mendoza to solve." James watched me carefully, understanding this was not a typical business decision. "Are you sure about this? Once we make the change, there's no way to reverse it without starting the whole process over." "I'm completely sure." My second stop was at Valley Investments, where Mark Chavez managed my portfolio. His office was more modern than James's, with glass walls, steel frames, and abstract art. The conversation, however, was just as direct. "The analysis you requested is ready," Mark said, handing me a thick report. "Your son's financial situation is more fragile than I imagined." I flipped through the pages and confirmed in black and white what I suspected. Daniel's consulting business was laden with debt propped up by credit lines I had guaranteed and clients I had personally recommended. His personal finances were stretched to the limit, with mortgage payments on a house that was underwater, 2 luxury car payments, and mounting credit card debt. Without the revenue from those 3 main clients, his cash flow will be negative in less than 60 days, Mark explained. Those 3 clients were companies I had worked with for years, businesses I had steered toward Daniel when he was just starting out. They stayed with him partly out of loyalty to me, and partly because I would silently review his work and make necessary corrections to ensure their satisfaction. "I want you to contact Reynolds Manufacturing Hidalgo Group and Perez Logistics," I said. "Inform them that I will be personally taking over their accounts from now on." Mark raised an eyebrow. "That represents about 60% of Mendoza Consulting's revenue." "Yes, it does." "Laura, I have to ask, is everything all right? These seem like very drastic measures." I remembered Daniel's words from the other night, his contempt, the way he dismissed me as useless. Everything is exactly as it should be, Mark. My third stop was the most difficult. Margaret Morales agreed to meet me for lunch at the country club, where just 2 days earlier my retirement party had been held. She looked older than I remembered, with deeper lines around her eyes and her usual composure slightly fractured. "Laura, thank you for agreeing to meet. I hope we can resolve this amicably." We sat at a quiet table overlooking the golf course, the same one where Fernanda had called me pathetic in front of all my colleagues. The irony was not lost on me. "Margaret, I'm going to be blunt. I know about the inquiries at the probate court. I know about your plans to challenge my mental capacity, and I know you've been using money from my loan to cover other debts while ignoring what you owe me." Her face paled, but she maintained a dignified front. "I don't know what you're talking about." I placed a folder on the table between us. "Here are copies of every financial move your family has made in the last 6 months, thanks to a very meticulous forensic accountant. Would you like me to read them aloud?" Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "How did you get that? That information is private. Not when you have a $2 million debt. It isn't." My lawyers have been very thorough. I opened the folder and began to read. March 15th, payment to Citibank $38,000. March 18th, payment to VW Credit $15,000. March 22nd, payment to Fernanda's credit card $24,000. Margaret's composure finally broke. "Please stop." April 3rd, transfer to Fernanda's account for her European vacation $47,000. April 7th, payment to the country club for her bachelorette party $10,000. I said stop. I closed the folder. Every one of those payments was made with money from my loan, money you promised to use to stabilize your business. Instead, you've been funding your daughter's lifestyle while plotting to have me declared mentally incompetent so you wouldn't have to pay me back. Margaret looked down at her untouched salad. Her voice was barely a whisper. "We were desperate. The business went under faster than we thought. We thought if we just kept up appearances a little longer, something would turn around. And if it didn't..." She didn't answer. "You were going to destroy my reputation, question my sanity, and possibly have me declared incompetent just to avoid paying back money you took in good faith. It wasn't supposed to be like this, but it is, and now there are consequences." I pulled out a formal notice that Patricia had prepared. "This is a demand for immediate payment of the full balance plus penalties. $2.6 million due within 30 days. Margaret's face went white. "We don't have that kind of money." "You know we don't." "Then you'll have to liquidate assets. The dealerships, the house, the yacht I've heard so much about." "Please, Laura, there must be another way. What if we work out a new payment plan?" "Margaret, you had a payment plan. You ignored it for 8 months while you spent my money on luxuries and planned to have me declared incompetent. There is no new plan." She was crying now, mascara streaking her face with dark lines. "This is going to destroy us. Fernanda doesn't know how bad things are. This will ruin her marriage, her whole life. Her marriage is built on lies and borrowed money. Maybe it's time she learned to live in the real world." I stood up to leave, but Margaret grabbed my arm in desperation. "Wait, there's something else you need to know about Daniel." I sat back down, intrigued despite myself. "Fernanda has been working on him for months, convincing him you were becoming unstable. She's been recording every conversation you've had, every decision that seemed odd to her. She was building a case. A case for what? To have you declared incompetent. She wanted Daniel to petition for legal guardianship of your affairs." I felt the restaurant tilt around me. "Guardianship. She convinced him you needed protection from yourself, that you were making bad financial decisions and someone needed to manage your money before you lost it all." A cold fury washed over me. She wanted control of my assets. She thought, like everyone, that you might have a few $100,000 saved up. Enough to be worth managing, but not so much that it would matter in the long run. And Daniel agreed to this. Margaret nodded sadly. "He loves you, Laura. He really does. But Fernanda made it seem like he was protecting you. She showed him articles about financial abuse of the elderly, stories of seniors who lost their savings to scams. She made him believe that taking control of my finances was an act of love. I stared out at the golf course, processing this information. My own son had been willing to take away my autonomy, to treat me like a child, unable to manage her own affairs, all because his wife convinced him it was for my own good. When was this supposed to happen? Soon. Fernanda was waiting for one more incident, something she could point to as proof of my decline. She thought my retirement party might be the opportunity. And it was, wasn't it, my revelation about the loan? She'll claim that proves you're delusional. Margaret looked down ashamed. That was the plan. I stood up again, this time with resolve. Thank you for telling me the truth, Margaret. It doesn't change anything about the loan. But at least now I understand the full picture. What happens now? I looked at this woman who had raised the daughter-in-law, who systematically poisoned my relationship with my son, who had taken my money while plotting my destruction. Now you face the consequences of your choices. All of you. That night I sat in my small apartment reviewing the day's events. 3 calls had already come in from Daniel. Apparently the business line of credit had been frozen pending restructuring, and 2 of his most important clients had canceled their contracts. I let each call go straight to voicemail. The 4th call was from Fernanda. Her voice sounded shrill and desperate. Laura, we need to talk. There's been a mistake with the bank, and my parents are saying crazy things about loans and money. And Daniel is having problems with his business. Please call me. We need to fix this. I deleted the message and poured myself a glass of wine. Outside my window, the city glittered in the darkness, full of people living their lives, making choices and facing consequences. Tomorrow, I would take the next step. Tonight, I would enjoy the silence. For the first time in years, no one was taking anything from me. No one was manipulating me, using me, or planning my downfall. I was finally completely in command of my life, and it felt magnificent. The desperate attempts to reconcile began exactly 72 hours after I froze Daniel's line of credit. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when I heard frantic knocking on the door, followed by Fernanda's voice calling through the wood. Laura, please, I know you're in there. We need to talk. This has gotten out of hand. I finished buttering my toast before going to the door. Through the peephole, I saw Fernanda pacing nervously in the hallway. Her normally impeccable hair was a mess, her makeup smudged. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Hello, Fernanda, you look tired. Please, she said, her voice breaking. Please, can we just sit down and talk about this? It's been a terrible misunderstanding. There has been no misunderstanding. Do you want me to play the recording from my retirement party, the one where you called me a bitter old hag? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. People say things when they're emotional. People show who they really are when they're emotional. That's when the masks come off. Fernanda's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. My parents are losing everything, she whispered. The bank is foreclosing on the dealerships. They're talking about selling the house. Daniel's business is falling apart. His clients are leaving. His line of credit is frozen. We might lose our house, too. I imagine that must be very stressful for you. Don't you care Daniel is your son? Don't you care what this is doing to him? I leaned against the doorframe, looking at this young woman who had spent 3 years treating me like an inconvenient relative she was forced to tolerate. Tell me, Fernanda, when you were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, did you think about what that would do to me? Her face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Your mother told me everything. The guardianship plan, the way you've been documenting my behavior, convincing him I needed protection from myself. You wanted to take over my finances and treat me like a child unable to manage her own affairs. Fernanda's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The irony is beautiful, isn't it? You thought I was some pathetic old woman with maybe a few $100,000 for you to manage for me. Instead, you found out I have enough money to end your entire family's financial stability with a single phone call. Please, she said again, but the word came out choked. Please what? Please let your family keep the money they stole from me. Please pretend you didn't spend 3 years treating me with contempt. Please ignore that you planned to strip me of my autonomy. I took a step back into my apartment. The answer is no, Fernanda, to all of it. I closed the door before she could reply, but I could still hear her sobbing on the other side. A part of me, the part that raised Daniel alone, the part that always tried to be the peacemaker, wanted to open the door and comfort her. But that part died at my retirement party when my own son called me useless. An hour later, Daniel arrived. He looked haggard, older than his 35 years, wearing clothes that looked like he'd slept in them. I let him in this time, but I didn't offer him coffee or ask him to sit down. Mom, you have to stop this. Whatever point you're trying to make, I get it. You're angry and you have every right to be. But this is destroying innocent people. Innocent people? I raised an eyebrow. Your wife was planning to have me declared incompetent to control my money. Your in-laws borrowed $2 million from me, then planned to claim I was mentally unfit to have made the loan. Where do you see innocence in any of this? Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar from his childhood, it squeezed my heart despite everything. I didn't know about any of that. I swear, Mom, I had no idea what they were plotting. But you did think I was becoming unstable. He was silent for a long moment. I was worried about some of your choices. Living in this small apartment when you could afford better driving that old car, not taking vacations. It seemed like you might be having trouble managing your money properly. So you were willing to take away my right to choose. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From living the way I wanted to live. From spending my money how I saw fit. From making decisions that might hurt you in the long run. I looked at my son, this man I had raised to be strong and independent, who had still been so easily manipulated into believing his mother was incapable. Daniel, I have been successfully managing money for 30 years. I built a consulting business from nothing. I amassed a fortune you can't even imagine. I made investments that turned thousands into millions, and you thought I needed your protection. I didn't know about any of that. You never told me. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I have. I wanted our relationship to be real. His voice broke. It is real, Mom. I do love you. No, Daniel. You love the version of me that you could feel superior to. The struggling accountant who needed your concern and your control. You don't want the successful businesswoman who has been propping up your career from the shadows for years. That's not true. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I already had prepared. Here are copies of every favor I did for you, every client I recommended, every credit line I guaranteed, every obstacle I silently removed from your path. For 15 years, I ensured your success while letting you believe you did it all alone. Daniel took the folder with trembling hands, flipping through pages of bank statements, letters of recommendation, and guarantee contracts he had never seen before. Why? He whispered. Because I wanted you to have confidence in yourself. I wanted you to believe in your abilities, but I also wanted to protect you from failure. And now you get to find out what you can really achieve without my help. Mom, please. I know I was wrong, but I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything? I looked at this man who shared my eyes and my stubborn chin, the center of my world, for 35 years. It means everything, Daniel. That's why this hurts so much. Then don't do it. Don't destroy my marriage, my business, my whole life over something that can't be undone. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just stopping my support. You're an adult with a college degree and 15 years of business experience. If you can't maintain your lifestyle without your mother's secret help, then maybe that lifestyle was never sustainable. And what about Fernanda? She made mistakes, but she loves me. She's pregnant, Mom. I felt my heart stop for a beat. What? She's 8 weeks pregnant. We just found out yesterday. She's terrified about what's happening with our finances and with her parents. That stress can't be good for the baby. For a moment, the room was completely silent. A grandchild, another chance at family, at a love that wasn't tainted by manipulation and greed. Then I remembered Fernanda calling me pathetic and Daniel saying I was useless. the guardianship papers that would have stripped me of my autonomy. "Congratulations," I murmured. "Mom, please, for the baby's sake, can't we find a way to fix this?" I walked to the window looking out at the city that had been my home for so many years. Somewhere, Margaret and Richard Morales were probably meeting with bankruptcy lawyers. In another corner, Fernando was crying over bank statements and foreclosure notices. "I'll make you a deal," I said finally. Daniel's face lit up with hope. "Full repayment of the Morales loan within 60 days. $2.6 million. His face fell. "You know they don't have that kind of money. Then they'll have to liquidate assets. Houses, businesses, investments, jewelry, everything. That will leave them with nothing. It will leave them with their health and their freedom. That's a lot more than they plan to leave me. And my business, what about the guarantees you pulled? Your business succeeds or fails on your own merit now. No more help from me." "And us? What about our relationship?" I turned to face him, memorizing his features, as if it were the last time I would see him. "That is entirely up to you, Daniel. Whether you can love and respect the real me, not just the version you thought you could control." He was crying now. Silent tears streamed down his face. "I never wanted to control you. I thought I was helping you." "I know. That's what makes it so tragic." When he left, I stood in my quiet apartment as the afternoon faded into night. The silence felt different now, heavier. I was getting what I demanded. Respect, acknowledgement, consequences for those who hurt me. But the cost was higher than I'd imagined. A grandchild was coming, and I might never know them. My son might never forgive me for this. The family I had cared for and protected for 35 years was crumbling around me. But for the first time in a long time, no one was taking advantage of me. No one was manipulating me or planning my downfall. I was finally free to be exactly who I was, with no apologies or explanations. The question was freedom worth it, if the price was being alone? I poured a glass of wine and watched the sun set over the city, knowing that the next day would bring new challenges, new decisions, new consequences. But tonight, I was simply Laura Mendoza, successful businesswoman, millionaire, survivor, and that would have to be enough. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Sun Tower wearing a custom-tailored navy blue suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The marble gleamed under my feet, reflecting the crystal chandeliers that bathed the space in warm light. This building now belonged to me, one of 3 commercial properties I had purchased in the last month. The elevator took me to the 15th floor, where glass doors were etched with the inscription, "Mendoza Financial Consulting, Private Wealth Management." My new office took up the entire floor with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city that had been my home for so many years. My assistant Clara, a sharp woman in her 40s, who came highly recommended, greeted me with the morning's agenda. "Good morning, Mrs. Mendoza. You have the Peterson consultation at 10 lunch with the Mayor's Economic Development Committee at 12 and the interview with Forbes at 3. "Thank you, Clara. Any messages?" "Several. Your lawyer called about the Morales bankruptcy proceedings. Everything has been finalized. Your accountant needs to review some tax implications of the new acquisitions, and—" she hesitated. "Your son called again. It's the 4th time this week." I nodded, taking the note without looking at it. "Hold all calls until after the Peterson meeting." The transformation had started slowly and then all at once. After Daniel left my apartment that day, I made a decision that changed everything. I was no longer going to hide who I was. Within a week, I hired the city's top image consultant, revamped my wardrobe, had professional photos taken, registered Mendoza Financial as a full-service wealth management firm, and started reaching out to the network of contacts I had built over 3 decades. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Apparently, for years there had been rumors of a mysterious investor who moved money intelligently behind the scenes. When I stepped out of the shadows, clients lined up to work with the woman who had silently built a fortune, while maintaining the very discretion they valued. My first big move was convincing 3 family trusts with a combined value of over $1 billion to transfer their portfolios to my firm. The news spread like wildfire through the city's wealthy circles. Laura Mendoza was the real deal. The Morales bankruptcy was swift and brutal. Unable to meet my payment demands, they were forced to liquidate everything. The car dealership was sold to a competitor for pennies on the dollar, and the house went to settle debts. The yacht, the art collection, even Margaret's jewelry. It all ended up at auction. They moved into a simple apartment on the other side of town, both taking jobs they were overqualified for, but desperately needed. Richard worked as a sales manager at a used car lot owned by his former competitor. Margaret worked part-time at a real estate agency, showing houses she could never live in again. Fernanda was devastated. The pregnancy had been difficult, marked by the stress and the drastic change in her circumstances. She lost the designer clothes, the spa treatments, the lifestyle that once defined her. The worst part was witnessing her parents' humiliation, knowing it was partly her fault. Daniel's business initially floundered without my support, but he proved to be more resilient than I imagined. He cut expenses, moved to a smaller office, and focused on building real relationships with clients instead of relying on my referrals. It was more work for less profit, but it was more honest. They sold the house I had helped them buy and moved into a 3-bedroom home in a middle-class neighborhood. Daniel drove a used sedan instead of a luxury car. Fernanda shopped at Target instead of Nordstrom, but they were getting by. The baby was born 3 months ago, a healthy girl they named Emily. The birth announcement was simple, sent by mail with a small photo. No fancy parties or expensive gifts from the grandparents, just a quiet welcome for a new life in an uncertain world. I stared at that photo for a long time, memorizing the tiny features of my granddaughter, wondering if I would ever hold her, if I would ever know her laugh or comfort her cries. The interview with Forbes that afternoon was supposed to be about my business accomplishments, but the journalist was more interested in the personal story. "You've become something of a legend in financial circles," she said, her recorder capturing every word. "The accountant who secretly built an empire. What made you keep it hidden for so long?" I thought carefully before answering. "I learned early on that people's perception changes when they know you have money. They start to see you as a resource, not a person. I wanted my relationships to be based on who I was, not what I owned." And did that strategy work? I smiled a sad smile. It revealed exactly what my relationships were truly worth. "It's been 6 months since you became estranged from your son. Do you have any regrets about how you handled the situation?" "I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret standing up for myself." "What would it take for a reconciliation?" That question stayed with me long after the interview was over. What would it take? An apology would be a start, but it wouldn't be enough. Real change, genuine respect, acknowledgement of the harm done. All of that takes time to grow and even longer to prove. I was still thinking about it that night, reviewing acquisition proposals in my luxury apartment. I had finally moved out of my modest rental. Then the doorman called. "Mrs. Mendoza, there's a young woman here with a baby. She says she's your daughter-in-law. Should I let her up?" I hesitated for a long moment. "Yes, send her up." 5 minutes later, I opened the door to find Fernanda in the hallway, holding a small pink bundle in her arms. She looked different. More mature, more tired, but somehow more authentic. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of designer clothes. And in her eyes, there was something that wasn't there before. Humility. "Hello, Laura. Thank you for seeing me. Come in." She walked into my new living room, taking in the expensive furniture, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their breathtaking view. But her gaze quickly returned to the baby in her arms. "This is Emily," she said softly, "your granddaughter." I looked at the sleeping infant, feeling my heart ache with a longing I had suppressed for months. She had Daniel's nose and what looked like my chin. "She's beautiful. Do you want to hold her?" With trembling hands, I reached for my granddaughter. She was so light, so perfect, so completely innocent of all the pain and betrayal that had brought us to this point. I owe you an apology, Fernanda said, almost in a whisper. Not just for what I said at your party, but for everything. For the way I treated you, for convincing Daniel to see you as a burden instead of the extraordinary woman you are. I looked up from the baby to study Fernanda's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by sincere remorse. I was spoiled, arrogant, and cruel, she continued. I thought money and status were the only things that mattered. I looked down on you because I thought you had less than me, and I felt threatened when I found out you had more. And now I understand what my parents did to you, what I did to you. We took advantage of your generosity and your love for Daniel. We planned to take away your autonomy. We treated you like you were disposable. She was crying now. Silent tears she didn't try to wipe away. I know you have every right to hate me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was, and I wanted you to meet your granddaughter. I held Emily closer, breathing in that sweet baby scent, feeling her tiny heart beat against my chest. What does Daniel know about this visit? Nothing. He doesn't know I'm here. He thinks you'll never forgive us, that we've lost you forever. And what do you think? Fernanda was quiet for a long time. I think that would be fair, but I hope that one day you'll give us a chance to earn back your trust. That would take time. Years, probably. I know. And it would require real change. Not just words, actions, proof. I understand. Emily stirred in my arms, making soft baby noises. I looked at her perfect little face and felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there, the hurt, the betrayal, but there was also love. Not for Fernanda, not yet, but for this innocent child who deserved better than the legacy of pain her family had created. I'm not ready to forgive, I said finally. I may never be, but I am willing to consider the possibility that people can change. Fernanda's face lit up with hope. Baby steps, I warned. Supervised visits with Emily, family therapy with Daniel, complete transparency about your finances and decisions. And if there is ever another betrayal, any attempt to manipulate or take advantage, it's over for good. Yes, she replied immediately. Yes, absolutely. And Fernanda, yes. I'm not the same woman who hid her accomplishments to make others comfortable. I will never again pretend to be less than I am. If we are going to rebuild this relationship, it will be with complete honesty about who we all really are. She nodded, wiping her tears. I wouldn't want it any other way. As she was getting ready to leave, I made a decision that surprised even me. Fernanda. She turned hopeful. Tell Daniel he can call me. Not to apologize or make excuses, but to talk about Emily, about being grandparents, about what comes next. Her smile was radiant. I will, thank you. After they left, I stood in my beautiful apartment surrounded by all the symbols of my success, holding a small pink blanket that still smelled like baby powder. The silence felt different now, not empty but full of possibility. I had learned that freedom wasn't just about cutting off those who had hurt me. It was about choosing who to let back in, under what conditions, and with what expectations. Tomorrow, Daniel would call. We would have difficult conversations about trust and forgiveness and the long road back to being a family. It wouldn't be easy, and there were no guarantees. But for the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Hope. The city glittered beyond my windows, full of people making their own choices, facing their consequences, rebuilding their lives. And somewhere in that vast tapestry of human experience, my granddaughter was sleeping peacefully, dreaming baby dreams in a world where her grandmother was finally completely, authentically herself. And that was enough. That was everything. The story we tell is fictional, but it is based on some real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identity of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I'm genuinely curious. If it were you in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to confront it all to get your voice back? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the end screen, I'm leaving you two of the channel's most beloved stories. I assure you they will surprise you. Thank you for staying until the end.